Some of my earliest memories are about my granddad talking about Siberia, or Siberia, as he always called it. He never lost his Polish accent. When I was a few years older than this, we would go for walks around his village or down to the sea, and as well as teaching me some basic Polish, he would also tell me about his experiences. He was always very happy and open to talking about what happened to him, different to other people I know who didn't like to talk about it. I think he maybe found it quite cathartic. My grandfather, Stan, or Stanisław, was born in the southeast of Poland. He lived on a small farm. The village was called Obręczówka. The nearest city was Tarnopol, and it was about an hour or two away by horse and cart. His family didn't have a lot. They grew some crops, barley, rye, wheat, and so on. They had a few animals. They had some birds, a couple of cows, a couple of pigs, a couple of horses. His father had got the land for half price because he'd fought in the Polish army against the Soviets in 1920. His father had another job, digging wells for some of the other farmers, a side hustle, you would call it nowadays, and my grandfather would help him out. School doesn't seem to have been regularly frequented. It seems to have been kind of optional. The Soviets invaded in September 1939, and my grandfather was 15 years old when he and his family were taken away from their home. Banging on the door by Soviet soldiers in the middle of the night, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., a story that will be sadly familiar to all of you. They were put on a sled at gunpoint. They were taken to the local train station and were put on a train. Not a regular passenger train, but a cattle wagon. No seats, no warmth, no toilet, just wooden floors and whatever belongings they'd been able to gather quickly and take with them. They were told that they would be taken to another village in Poland, but it was a lie. They were taken to Siberia. Amongst all the stories about World War II, this story of the Polish deportees remains not that well known. We can only hypothesize why. The Soviets were our allies during the war. Perhaps it was an uncomfortable truth. But the numbers don't lie. More than 1 million Poles were deported. And that's why organizations like this and events like this are so important, to remember what happened. And it's about more than just remembering. As part of writing my book and publicizing the book, I often have to post on social media. And it's apparent that as well as people's lack of awareness of what happened, there also appear to be people out there who want to deny or rewrite what happened. I sometimes get comments about the Poles being to blame, the Poles starting the war, the Russians giving them freedom. So again, that's why these events and these organizations are so important. It's not just about history, it's also about the present and about the future. It goes without saying that Siberia was horrible. Everyone who is there has their story to tell. The freezing temperatures, the suffering, the disease, the lack of food, the illness, the death. My granddad said that the Soviets cared if an animal died, but not if a person died, as a person could be more easily replaced. Well, we're all waiting for our lunch here. I just wanted to read what my grandfather said about the food in Siberia. We were paid in food, bread and potato soup. Every day there was the same food, and the soup was more like water than soup. The food was rationed. All the work that we did was piecework, so that the amount of food you got depended on the amount of work that you did. But we were always hungry. We never got paid as much as the Russians who were also working there, and the NKVD secret police got the best rations, like meat and sugar. For a full 12-hour day of hard manual work, we would only get about a kilo of brown Russian bread. Sometimes we tried to cheat. One of us would stand at the front of the line and get the family's ration of bread. Another one of us would wait in the middle of the line and then ask for the bread again when they got to the front. Sometimes the baker couldn't remember if he had served that family already or not. My mother and younger brother and sister got even less food. "You're not doing any work for us," the guard said, "so why should you eat?" They got a daily ration of just a couple 100 grams of bread and a bowl of watery soup. I used to dream about my mother's food back in Poland, like the cakes that she used to make, or about kielbasa or bigos or swanina. My clothes were baggy and getting worn out and ragged. I could see my body getting thinner, and I could start to see more bones sticking out of my body. I felt tired all the time and had a cough. 15 years old, was old enough to go and work in Siberia, so he was sent out 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. First felling trees and then working in a blacksmith's. Every day thinner, weaker. His mother and his younger brother succumbed, and they died there. It was hard to dig their graves in the frozen ground. I was fortunate that my grandfather had an incredible memory for what happened to him. He remembered the names of the Russian towns beside the camp where he was, Noshul and Murashey. And you can look them up in Google Maps. And if you put it on a satellite view, you can see the landscape of snow and trees and rivers where they labored. Things must have seemed so hopeless for them. The Germans were taking over Europe, the Soviet Union was taking over the Baltic states, Britain had been pushed back, America was not yet in the war. They might have spent the rest of their lives in the Gulag. But the German invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941 gave them some hope. Suddenly, the Poles were allowed to leave the camps. My granddad, aged 17, joined them, going to look for the Polish army, the Anders army, although he didn't know where it was. That would be the start of his remarkable journey halfway around the world. He was in his 80s when we decided to write down his story into a book. As I got older, I increasingly realized what a remarkable story it was. And as he got older too, we knew that we didn't want to lose that story. He had had many people approach him already wanting to write down his story from newspapers and so on, but he'd always turned them down and said no. I think he wanted a family member to write his story. So I'd drive over every weekend to his house near St Andrews in Scotland, and we'd spend a few hours going through his story.